Hello and welcome back to Fantasy Grounds RPG map and image creation. I'm Josh and I'm going to be taking you through these tutorials. And here we are at episode 3. Last episode, we picked our colors and kind of created our color palette in a very simplistic kind of way. We implemented them into our image and then we created a seamless texture. The texture was then applied to the entire landmass, and we kind of created some nice variants in there, and it's really starting to come along. So now we're going to do a basic kind of same situation with our water. We're going to go about it a little bit differently, and so I'm going to give you some different tips and ideas on a lot of different ways that you can create these kind of effects, and you can find which ones work best for you. I tend to like ones that allow me a little bit more control, but I do like some randomness in there, and you guys can decide on how you like to implement them. In the water itself, what we're actually going to do in this particular in this style is, instead of creating our shadows at this moment, what we're actually going to do is some of the highlighted areas. So we're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to add in all of those shadows as we progress, but what we're doing right now is we're kind of pushing those boundaries of our contrast as we did in the beginning, and we're going to be darkening up the land. We will add highlights to the land eventually, but and we're going to be lightening up the water, and so we're going to kind of accentuate that. One of the things that we use our color in the water to the value in the water to demonstrate is depth. So oftentimes you'll notice in maps all around the coast it's a little bit lighter, and everything out from there is less. It gets darker and darker as it kind of goes away. And there's a couple of different ways that we can do this, and so I'm going to show you some of them, actually. I'm sure that there's there's lots of different ways that can be done, and we're going to go over a couple of those today. We're also going to add a little bit more of that textural kind of information into the water. We'll go about that a little bit different as well. And so let's get going here. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to be working on adding some of that texture information to our water. Now we could do this exactly the same way as we did the land, although I would create a different type of a seamless texture and paint it in as we went around. But I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can do some stuff, and you can decide on kind of how you like to do it. And this is going to use a couple of built-in features that Photoshop has, so it might not be available in all types of image editing software, but you can certainly do something similar. And what we'll do is we're just going to make sure that we have our water layer selected. Make sure that we also have our water color selected, and the background color is set to white, and you'll see why in a minute here. We're going to duplicate this layer by hitting Ctrl J, and we're going to go up to our filters and we're going to go to render. And so we can go to clouds, and what that does is it does a mixture of randomly generated kind of information here between our foreground and our background color. Now with this all done, so now with this created, it looks a little bit like clouds and not a whole lot like water. And so we're going to add another filter to this, and we're going to go to our filter gallery here, and we're going to go to bas relief. You can find that under sketch, and if I zoom out here, you can see that it creates a kind of water texture. Now what we want to make sure that we have done, it's kind of lopsided on one side, and we're going to be only using this side of it because we want mostly just like these little highlights, not a drastic amount of water over there. I mean, not a drastic amount of highlight on one side. And as our light source is all coming from the top left, I oftentimes always do that. And we want to make sure that that's selected so that our light is coming from the proper way here. And we're going to hit OK. And here we have all of this information, and you can see that this is really what we're looking for over here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my lasso tool and I'm going to select this side of what we've created. I'm going to inversely select it and just delete it. We don't need it. Hit Ctrl D to deselect, and I'm going to grab my eraser here, make sure it's in soft round, and I'm going to just kind of soften up these edges here. We don't want this to be, you can see, let's turn off our colors so we can really see what we're doing. And I'm even going to turn off my land for the moment. And so we can drop down our opacity here a little bit because, you know, we want to build up our layers. We don't want it to be, it looks like maybe like 70%. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I want to make sure that this is set to a lighten. And what that's going to do, or lighter color. What either one of these will do is it's only going to allow these white areas to show through. And we can see that this is underneath here. It doesn't really matter at this stage, and we'll probably drop this down before we do a whole lot more things, but it's kind of where we're at right now. And we can either use Alt and pull out another one of these. I'm going to just bring this down to like a small little excerpt here. We might want to just soften the middle here. I'm going to change my opacity down to maybe 25% so I'm not too intrusive when I try to adjust that. And either with Ctrl J to duplicate that or hold down Alt with your Move tool selected, we can duplicate this around a little bit. We can even grab this and change its orientation here a little bit. And so what we're doing here is we're just making sure that we're building up and building up. We don't want to go too overboard with anything. And you can see that this is starting to create some of this information here. Some of it's a little bit too much. You never have waves or whatnot that interacted that much. And if we collapse all these down, we can now kind of go in, and maybe we don't want to do it that much. We could even actually drop down the opacity of this to make it a little bit more subtle. But that's just going to give some of that base kind of information, much like we did with the land. And we're going to build up from here. This is going to become more and more exaggerated as it goes. And you could change the size of these if you want to. Obviously, you have to take care of these sharp edges, but if you wanted a little bit more natural kind of looking water formations that would be relevant to the size of the landmass, you could certainly do that. But we're going to be building this up, and so we need a little bit of variant underneath that gets exaggerated when we do our screen and multiply layers. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to lighten the areas around the land itself. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. The easiest one that I have found, and one that's kind of quick, is if we select our lands, we can just hold down the Control key, and when we click on this little thumbnail of the layer on the side here, it will select all of the opaque pixels. Just what we have created in our silhouette here, which means that nothing on the outside is selected. And so we can expand this selection. If we go up to our selection tools up here, we can modify it and expand it. Now, depending on the size of your map, and this might change a little, but if we go 50 pixels, you can see that it makes a pretty good outline around the entire thing here. I'm going to go just underneath of it, and I'm going to make a new layer. And I'm going to use the same color that we did before. And I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to go back to my selection, and I'm going to modify it, and I'm going to feather it. And I'm going to feather it out about 10 pixels. What that does is it changes from a very rigid line to one that has a gradation in its opacity. So it starts off completely opaque and then it fades out. So we can easily now switch over to our paint bucket tool. We can either click here or hit G on our mouse, on our keyboard, and we're just going to drop that in here. But we're going to change our layer style here to screen. You can see what that does here. If I take away my selection, we have created a nice kind of halo around the entire thing here. And as always, one of the easiest ways to adjust this is just with our opacity. So we can bring this down to a more manageable level. We can also, if we think it's too far away from the landmass, we can hold down Alt, and in the corner here, we can adjust the size a little bit and bring it down. Great. Everything is starting to come along fantastically. That's going to be it for this episode. What we're going to be doing next time is we're going to get back into working on our lands, and we're going to start to pull out some of those interesting kind of concepts. We're going to be working out some of our mountainous areas, and through this tutorial, we're going to go through all of the different features that you might want to include in your maps. We're going to do everything from waterfalls to how to display swamp regions, turbulent water, everything. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.